Hello, I'm Michael Redmond, professional 9-dan Go player. The position in the lower left was an ancient joseki with a branching point after black wedges at c6. So does white cut on the right or connect underneath on the left? In this series of videos, I've introduced some players. Honinbo Sansa, the founder of the Honinbo school, and he was the first Meijin. Nigen was his strongest rival at the dawn of the Golden Era. Nakamura Dōseki was a student of Sansa and the second Meijin, and he's playing in this game also. Yasui Santetsu was the first leader of the Yasui school, and Hayashi was the first leader of the Hayashi school. So the new player in this game, Inoue Genkaku Inseki, was the first leader of the Inoue school. And these 6 players were called the Furuki Mono, which I might translate to the ancient players. The word furui means old or ancient. So with respect, they were referred to as the Furuki Mono. They were the prominent players before the Iemoto school system and the castle games were systemized. So they weren't actually playing at the Edo castle or stuff like that. But some of these games that they played were categorized as castle games. So this game was said to have been played at the imperial court, and it was included in the collection of castle games. Okay, let's get started. So Doseki has white. In the period of time where he was Meijin, he played all of the prominent players, and he did leave behind a large number of game records. So I think there's about 80 game records of Doseki that we still have. So that's the largest number of any of the players of this time. Okay, in the lower left corner, this is a move that was played until modern times. It could be played now, I think. So usually, of course, white would be playing locally. This would be the most common joseki, where white would be making a living shape there on the bottom side. But if white sees some significance in controlling the left side of the board, maybe white's going to play here. So the most common response to this would be to bump against. And this was played maybe in the 20th century a lot, even before that, where black would bump against white and play a hanging connection. So this was the joseki of the time, after which white would play an extension on whichever side white felt to be more important. So maybe moves like this would be, the high extension here at 4 would be linking up to a white move here, sort of surrounding the black group, after which a move like this would become forcing for white. So instead, black pincered here. Yes. Also, I should show this move. This is the move that tends to be suggested by AIs. So in modern Go, you would probably see players playing this move also. Okay, so black played a pincer, and white plays this. So this, in modern times, this was played without that black stone at c10. But that black stone at c10, of course, is close enough to be to change how they play the whole joseki. So black played an atari and then wedged. So if black had wedged immediately, white would have played an atari here. And in this case, there is some potential for that black stone at c10 to become a bit redundant, because after this, white would be capturing the black stones in the corner. Black would have the opportunity to cut here and capture in a ladder. Maybe there's not the ideal ladder breaking move in this board position, but if we imagine that at some time later black ends up adding a stone here, that black stone at c10 is a bit too close to black's strong position. So in this case, that black stone at c10 would not be in the optimal place, and white would have a good shape towards the lower side. So this would probably be good for white. And black plays an atari here. And wedged. So at this point, white has a choice of cutting, which is the stronger fighting move. And that was the joseki, actually, that they played in this era. If you want to avoid complications, it is an option to put beneath here. in which case something like this might happen. It's in this case, it's probably good for black to avoid playing the forcing move at e2, so black had a forcing move here. But this would, because of the fact that black has not yet really established an area on the bottom side, it's not necessary to play that move. So it's probably better not to play it. And if white curls along the second line, black is getting more influence towards the center. Later, if black plays at c9 at some point, there will be a squeeze from that side too. So it's not as if that stone at the 3-3 point at c3, it's not as if that stone is going to be wasted, because black can squeeze, has possibilities to squeeze from either side. Okay, so white cut in the game. This other variation that I just showed you, it's okay for white to play this if you want to keep things simple. So you just have to bear in mind that black's going to control that part of the center of the board. So in the game, white cut. And this is the variation where that stone at c10 becomes even more important, because without it, black would be crawling along the second line for a longer period of time, and it would be bad. But in this case, black is going to connect up to the third line. And it's also important that black is not playing the squeeze at b4, because if black had played this first, then different things might happen on the right side. So if white plays here, it would be a big fight here. It might be a bit dangerous for black. So black wants to keep that potential forcing move at e2, so that black can, for instance, in this case, black would be able to play here and capture the ladder. So after white curls around here, now black can play the squeeze. So that's an example of the correct move order. And this was a good light move. If black had extended, then white would be alive. Let's just have white play, for instance, here. And this would not be a forcing move. So that's why the jump is more efficient. And if white had played away, then black would have a forcing move here. And this would be forcing. So white would have to put a stone in the corner, and black would be getting a good position towards the right part of the lower side. So white wedged, and black answered here. So by answering immediately at e5 instead of playing an Atari at f4, black is leaving the potential cut from underneath here. So that's an important move. And white added one more stone. So this was a fairly straightforward exchange. Each move was pretty much forced and made sense. So white gets a corner territory, black gets a position on the left side, and sort of a position on the right side of the lower side. And white has this group in the center, which is, at the time, it's not very strong. So white will need to reinforce it fairly soon. But first white wedges here, and this depends on the ladder. So if black had cut underneath, then it would depend on this ladder. And in the course of that joseki they played in the lower left, the ladder favors white. So that's why wedging here works. And white's going to gain some territory in the top right before continuing in the lower left. So if white had not played that, the move in the lower left, the move that they played in this era and throughout the Edo era was this move. So this is the shape move, making an I shape there for white. And it's also significant that black's group on the side, it's not 100% alive. So not only this side, but also this side. If we imagine something like this, black has 7 stones on the second line. So that's a position where if black plays first, black's going to have 2 eyes. But if white plays first, it's just 1 eye. So it's not completely alive yet. There are some cases in which white might potentially have an attack or be able to force black to add a stone to that group on the left side. So there is that possibility. And that's why the players reinforce the white group by playing at 1. More modern ideas would be playing here and just sort of ignoring those 2 stones that white has on the C line, which can be sacrificed if at any point black plays. This would be a key point for black too, but white can sometimes sacrifice those 2 stones. So with computer analysis, I often see white pushing here instead of the old joseki. So in the game, white wedges here, taking advantage of the good ladder in this variation, and grabbing some corner territory. So this was the game variation. White did want to return to the left side because that's joseki there. It's sort of unfinished. So instead of playing this move, which would leave a cut potentially at p15, modern players and computers tend to like this move a lot better because it gives white a much better corner territory and also leaves that weakness at p15. But white wanted sente in this case, so I think it sort of makes sense that white played the Atari and then defended here. So again, this is the defensive move that was played in this era, and it's a good shape move. So in that way, it's a good example for players. And this was a forcing sequence that black gets in the corner. So you can see how small the white corner is compared to the variation where white played S17, and black extended here. This move is a relatively passive move. It's a no komi game move because this game there's no komi. It means that black can play very solidly and still maintain a lead. So this is an example of that. It would be more active for black to play this kakari, basically. So 3 is, in the computer analysis, 3 is always an important point, which is threatening to play, for instance, at 4 next and control the whole center. So it's basically a forcing move for black. And then the kakari at 5 would be a much more active way to play. And in modern Go theory, we say that black should not be spending a lot of stones building territory next to that wall. So sometimes black can try to use it to attack. So black would prioritize this kakari in the lower right or a kakari in the top left. In the game, black plays this way. So you can see black playing a relatively simple way, getting rid of the weak groups. So this defended the group on the left side. Again, it was not the AI move, but it was praised by some very strong players in the 19th and the 20th century. Keeping the game simple was the main idea here. This point in the center was always important. So this would be putting some pressure on black on the lower side. And white has already played the important point at 03. So this black group does not really have anywhere to expand into when white plays at 1. It means that white can launch a relatively leisurely attack with this knight's move. And black will probably reply something like this. And white would return to the top left corner. So in this case, white would be establishing a presence in the center of the board. And in the game, we're going to see black control the center. So that's why it would have been probably good for white to take this opportunity to control the center by threatening to attack black on the bottom side. So Honinbo Sansa and his students did have a tendency to like the sides, to control the sides, and they went for quick development. So this J17 is an example of that, where white is trying to gain territory and control of the sides while reducing the potential of black's outside influence. So black has a strong position in the top right and potential to build into the center. So white's concerned with that in playing this move. Diving into the 3-3 point, it was a bit unusual at the time, surprisingly modern looking move, but it makes sense with black's strong position on the left side. Black wants to get as far into the corner as possible. So it's a more active move than, say, C16 would be. And it's true that white doesn't really want to play anything towards the left side. So if white had played here, there would be nothing to do with that wall. So that facing towards that left part of the board, it's pretty useless for white. So that explains white's moves here. Very sensible for white to be giving the left side to black. And white takes the final side point. So there is an issue with a potential invasion here. Black did not take this opportunity to play there, but it's going to be an issue continually. And we're going to see white deal with that later in the game. So black extended here. Black's still trying to keep the game simple, and white bumped against. So this is a move where white is defending, to a certain extent, white is defending the large knight's move, corner enclosure in the lower right, because if white had left it, then black would have had various invasions. So for instance, this would be one way to do it, in which black would be threatening to link up at the start point. And otherwise, black would be connecting underneath. So there's a number of ways black can invade the corner, starting with 2 and then jumping in at 4. This is kind of a middle game joseki. It's worth knowing if you have a white position like this. Otherwise, sometimes jumping in here immediately or playing here, this works well in connection with that stone that black has at M3. So this is also a very common way to attack the shimari. While the 3-3 point is sometimes a weakness in white's Ogema shimari, it usually works better with a black stone at R5. So when white is controlling the right side with that stone at R7, I meant R6. If there's a black stone at R6, then sometimes this works well with that. So that's what white was doing with the bump here. So now, if black plays here, white can just cover it up, and it's not going to be very successful for black. So the big difference is that black doesn't have a connection up on the side. Okay, so white did play that hane, and so this is partially dealing with the weakness at F17, and white added one more stone. So white is reinforcing that top side while trying to reduce black's potential in the center of the board. So here black is just reducing from above. So this is making a threat to invade at Q3 next. And white defended. And so black plays here. We can see black spreading out into the center, still threatening that white group on the left, which has only one eye so far. So white played a peep here and starts to move out. So this was a very solid way for white to move out into the center. Maybe this would have been a more active way to reduce black's center area. Okay, so black has started to attack white on the left. And white took the opportunity to finish the top side. So with this, the weakness at F17 has completely disappeared. So this is an example of the Amashi strategy, where you take territory, deal with your weaknesses, weak groups, or weak territories, and gradually reduce your opponent's territory. So it became very popular with Honinbo Shua, who was about 2 centuries after this game. So he was the person who maybe perfected this style. It makes for a very complicated endgame, though, because there's a lot of space in the center to deal with in this game. So black is reducing white's area on the top side. For the time being, black is threatening white on the top side. So for instance, if white leaves it, black can push through and cut here. And for instance, something like this might be an example of how white is going to lose a lot of territory on the top side. So white pushed here. So this is a good shape. Black is still threatening that cut on the second line. So in this case, black might start with the hane here and would be able to cut like this. So cutting these 2 stones off would be, obviously it would be very big. So white added a stone here, and black played this. In modern Go, this is just a basic tesuji. It's used when black has a weakness on the outside. By playing this exchange, black does make it impossible for white to move out. Any move on the O line is a bad idea now for white. So it's getting rid of white, the possibility of white playing here. It's a tesuji that's used in modern Go, and it's interesting to imagine if maybe it was invented by Inoue Genkaku Inseki in this game. You do have to remember that gives white 6 points in that corner. So if you didn't need to do it, then it did lose a bit of territory. It lost a couple of points. So black starts in to make the center. It's really difficult to see in what direction black should build the center. So black is building the top right part first. And now black defended here. So that was a relatively vulnerable knight's move. So if white had played the same point, black would have been forced to connect dame points. So that's why that was a big move. And at this point, white reinforced that group on the left. And black is starting to surround the center in earnest. So this was the shape move here. Might have been slightly better for black to play this move, which is not really a shape move, but the fact that black is strong in the area makes it okay to play this move. And white would push through and black would pull back at this point. So this would be a couple of points better than the game, at least. So it would be slightly better if we assume the same sequence following as the game sequence. This would give black more territory. This is generally the shape move, so it would be the move that would spring to mind sort of automatically. And they're playing an endgame. So it's interesting to see how the focus of black's surrounding territory is sort of switches from the top half of the center to the bottom half of the center. And making this a very difficult endgame to play, but it looks like he's playing it quite accurately. So black managed to close off that part of the center. And the center, there's still a big move at L12, the hanging connection here. That's still a big move. But after black has established this area in the center, the focus goes back to the side. So in the endgame, the second line is often the biggest, and white starts with this. So this was a big move. That was a double sente hanetsugi, so that was why that was big. It was sente from white's point of view also. Let's take a look at that. So if white had played here, in this position, it could be that black would be starting stuff in the corner. So that's why black wasn't answering it. But just locally, if we assume this exchange, then white can capture in a net. So that's why it's sente. For the time being, I think that white had to answer it N2. So black gets to play that anyway. And black cut here. So another big move would be B19. That would be a big move. It's sente for white. But cutting here is surprisingly big. It does establish a territory there in the center. And so they're continuing with the endgame. There's some fishy things about this endgame because I think Nakamura Doseki was a fairly precise player in the endgame. But there's some moves that are a bit suspicious. So it could be that playing in the imperial court, maybe he was trying to make the game interesting for the viewers. So for instance, this move is probably not as big as this move or even this move. So there's some questions that I have. There are some questions I have about the move order here. So in the game, they play a ko here. And white connects the ko. So all of the big endgame moves are finished except for one. So yes, so this move here. This move here, it would have been a big move for white to play here and push through. So white doesn't have to worry about this cut because white 5 is forcing. And so there's nothing happening there. So this exchange would have been forcing, and black would have answered it here. And if white had played this exchange, I think white would have won by a small margin. In the game, white did not play that, and the fact that white's not playing that and they're playing moves like this, it makes me wonder about the order of moves. And black got to play this move. So when black plays here, it's extremely close. Okay, so they're finishing the game, and white filled the ko. When I looked this game up in the Castle Game collection, there's a note that says in the ancient record, the source said that black won by 1 point, but if we look at this diagram, it's a jigo, so we're going to call it a jigo. It turns out that Nakamura Dōseki was one of the first players to have a number of complete records that were counted. And it turns out also that there's a few of his games in which the ancient sources had results that disagreed with modern counting. And I found it interesting that these so-called mistakes in the ancient sources agreed with Chinese counting. So I'm going to sort of make a guess here and talk about the counting systems a little bit. Obviously, I don't have enough data to say anything with confidence, but there seems to be a relationship to the Chinese counting. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So people hypothesize that there was an ancient time when they just kept on playing until they'd filled the whole board. So the player who could keep on playing longer was the winner of the game. And they even had a rule where you had to leave 2 eyes for each group. So it was called kirichin, and there was a 2-point penalty. The Chinese kept that rule even when they changed to modern rules. So they kept it for a while, and they finally got rid of it. Basically, it gives the same result as modern counting systems, but perhaps they decided that it wasn't fun to just fill up your own territory, so they stopped the game at this point. And the Chinese and the Japanese came up with different abbreviations of this counting system to make it work without filling up all that territory on your own. So there's 2 systems, which are actually, we could call them siblings, which derived probably from the same ancient game. So to start with the Japanese system, which I think most of the viewers of this video are fairly familiar with, you take the captured stones, you fill the dame first, and then you take the captured stones and you count the territories. In this case, both sides would have 58 points. So you fill your opponent's territory with the captured stones, and you get 58 points for black and 58 points for white, and you call it a jigo. So that's the modern counting system in Japan. So if we talk about the Chinese system, they fill the dames, and let's see. So it's like this, and this is the same position where black has just filled a dame in the center. So let's go back to that other position. If we fill the dame on this board, it's important to note that black is going to play the final dame. So that's this move. So black has played the final dame. And in the Chinese rules and in the ancient rules, the number of stones, living stones you have on the board is significant. So filling the final dame, there's a difference of 1 point between the Japanese counting and the Chinese counting. So back to that other image. We filled the dame here. So that's the first step in the Chinese. I'm going to make an approximation of Chinese counting, just an example here. But you just form territories. You've already discarded the dead stones, but also you can rearrange the living stones or put them back in the bowls. You just want to get a nice round number here. So in this case, I've counted 80 points of black territory. And I've taken some of the living stones off the board to make it a round number. So the more territory you have, the less stones you have to count afterwards, because the next step is you count the remaining living stones of black like this. So you get you had 80 points of territory and you have 101 points in stones. So you give black a score of 181. And in the modern Chinese rules, you compare that with 1/2 of the Go board. So the Go board has 361 points. 1/2 of that is 180.5. So with 181, black won by 1/2 of a stone. So it turns out, because of the fact that the Go board has an odd number of points, there's no way for the Chinese rules to have a jigo. Someone's going to win by 1/2 a stone or 1 point. If you have a seki or something, there can be special cases where the number of dames inside the seki can change the result in a way that can sometimes make a jigo, I suppose. The way to get a Japanese result with this Chinese counting system would be to imagine if we had done the same process with the white territories and stones, we would have gotten 180. So if we'd compared white's score of 180 to black's score of 181, we would have gotten a result of black winning by 1 point. So the difference of it being a 1 point win for black or a half stone win for black. It's just the size of the unit. So there's actually the same thing being said in a different way. So going back to the original position, this was a jigo in the modern Japanese counting system, but it was a half stone win for black in the modern Chinese system. And in this system that I'm suggesting, which was a hybrid of Japanese and Chinese, it was a 1-point win for black. So that's just a suggestion that maybe in some of his games, Nakamura Dōseki might have used a Chinese-ish counting system. But of course, we don't have enough data to say that for sure. Thank you for watching this game, and I hope you enjoyed. And there will be more games from the golden era of Go. We're getting close to Dosaku now, so that's going to be exciting.